politics, but unfortunately, where we are currently, the numbers don't lie. American civic knowledge is low. Civic instruction receives the lowest number of K-12 classroom hours out of any subject, which we'll talk to our guests about maybe why that is, but it's not great. And so Lindsey Cormack, PhD, Associate Professor of Political Science and Director of the Diplomacy Lab at Stevens Institute for Technology, argues that it's not lost for the next generation of Americans. She has written a book called How to Raise a Citizen and Why It's Up to You to Do It. And she joins us now to talk about the book and just in general where we are as a society when it comes to talking about politics and being involved as a citizen. Welcome to the show, Doctor.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Absolutely. So how did we get here? Because I feel like it wasn't always that civics was taught this little. The average American, I think, knew a lot more about our government. What was kind of the turning point when this stopped being such a priority in schools?
So a lot of it started in the 1940s and 50s when we had to reprioritize what we were going to be teaching in schools to sort of deal with international politics. With the space race, with the concern that there are going to be other nuclear powers, a lot of our energies went to going to things that we now know as STEM. So science, technology, engineering, and math. Alongside of that, or at least coincident in time, we also have the rise in standardized testing, so the ACT and the SAT. The SAT has never had any component of government or social studies knowledge on it. The ACT did for a little bit, but they ended that in 1987, so the test could be more comparable to the SAT. So because of our over-indexing in terms of like what we focus on for funding, and that goes to STEM, something had to get cut. Usually that's the arts, that's music, that's civics, that's history. And in those cuts, civics got the worst of it, where year over year, time in the classroom has been at the lowest it's ever been because we just aren't prioritizing it for funding. We don't have teachers who have the requisite skills to teach it at a full-time level. And when we think about what teachers are gearing towards, it's good SAT and ACT scores for their kids. And something that we learned in talking to teachers around the United States is if it's not tested, it's not taught. And that's one of the reasons it's really hard to get a social studies curriculum that's robust, because we know that at the end of the day, that score is what allows kids to get into college. It's how we rank our schools. And so it's really hard for us to find the minutes to put that sort of stuff in the classroom.
And it's not only, it's the number of hours, but it's also the standardization, right? As far as, I mean, we know, just regardless the argument about the Department of Education, but most curriculum is decided at a state level. Each state is allowed to make their own criteria for what it is to, quote unquote, pass, to have enough civics education. Like I think in Wisconsin, you just have to be able to pass a test. And so talk a little bit about what you found in researching for this of how different the curriculum that does exist around civics is from state to state or even district to district.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. There's no national curriculum for this. It's something that every state gets to decide. They get to decide how many semesters you're going to have, whether or not you're going to pass a test that usually looks like the citizen test, something like that. And what we found is that though there is wide variety, there's sort of a modal style of delivery, which is usually in 7th or 8th grade, students will be exposed to their first social studies class. Sometimes that's like a world history class. Sometimes it's an American history class, but that's when they start having the discussion about what it was to have America be founded and settled, and then a little bit of early American history. Then usually we wait again until the 11th or 12th grade, and students will get a class called government. Sometimes it's a semester, sometimes it's a half semester split with either geography or economics, but unlike every other subject where we scaffold from K through 12 and we sort of layer, this is one where we dip in 7th or 8th grade and then we dip in again in that high school end of the term. And when we look at test scores for AP US government, which is only 2% of students who take that, on average, it's one of the lowest scoring AP test offered, where the majority of students who sit for this for most of the years that we have offered it do not earn enough to consider it a passing or college credit eligible grade. So we know that kids aren't getting this in schools, and part of it is there's not enough time. It's too little time, and we dip in only middle school and high school for one semester or a year at most.
And what is, from your opinion, obviously this is a biased question, but it's a question that is based in your opinion, like what are we losing as a society, as a populace by, I understand that why we don't have it as far as we didn't test for it, we're not funding for it, but the cost of not doing that, what have we lost?
This is a great question. We lose the ability to have not only pride in our national institutions, but to have trust in each other that we're all trying to work to something that's better for all of us. When we think about the founders as either these heroes or villains, we lose all the middle, which is they're humans. They have great qualities and they have flaws. And if we can start there and then teach our students how to have conversations that could recognize the light in people and the darkness, or the light in an era and the darkness of an era, and hold those truths simultaneously, we can get to better outcomes. But too often we have teachers who are constrained in how much they can say in a classroom, maybe by their state legislatures, but certainly by the fear of parental blowback. The research that we did for this book, as well as research that other civic organizations do, will tell you that teachers feel afraid to talk about even the very basic topics, because if a parent hears something and takes it the wrong way, they might inflame a Facebook group, they might email the principal, they might barrage the teacher themselves with emails or show up at their office hours. No teacher wants to live like that. And so in not focusing on this and in not giving the resources to people in the classroom to do this, we are raising generations of people who really don't understand how our politics function. And that means our politics can't function that well if we're all playing catch up from 18 to 85 because no one taught us earlier. We could have a way more functional and a way more fun government if we did this work. But in the absence of knowing that it's going to be very hard to get it done in schools, I argue that we have to do this in our own homes and our own communities.
Well, I'll ask this question, then we'll go to break, talk more about the book. But do you feel like, is there an argument to be made that part of the reason we have fallen prey to being so partisan is because of the absence of this civics education?
I think that's certainly part of it, because you can't have a centering sort of place to have dialogue. It's also happening in coincident with rises in like anti-social media or individuated media environments where you're only going to see what you're going to see. You're not going to see what anyone else is going to see. So that's all working together. But yeah, if we don't have practice in the schools, it's hard to get to reasonable outcomes.
We're talking to Dr. Lindsey Cormack, who is a political science professor and author of How to Raise a Citizen and Why It's Up to You to Do It. We'll talk more about the book and some of the practical advice. I have a 2-year-old, so I'm very excited to get some practical advice on how to raise a citizen. So we'll get into that after this on Point Taken. The lack of curriculum when it comes to civics in schools. And so when you found that out, that's basically what motivated you to write this book and kind of a how-to for parents to address this, right?
Yeah, and I got into this because I work at a tech school that has the smartest students. My kids are so good at doing school. They're great, earnest learners. But when I saw that these really bright kids didn't know the very basics of government, I was like, uh-oh, this is something we got to figure out, because I've been used to being around people who are in that political science world, but at a technical school, not a lot of students come in with that knowledge set. And if those kids aren't getting it, there's plenty more who are getting even less.
Yeah. And so I think it's interesting as a parent's book, because when we were talking before, as far as some of this starting as late or as far back as like the 1940s, as things switching and priorities changing for how schools were prioritizing curriculum, is it a broad assumption that parents are now equipped to be teaching these things to their kids if they didn't also get it?
So that's part of this book where it's not scoldy. It's not like, you should know this. It's like, guess what? We all were raised in systems that were already actively deprioritizing civics. That sucks, but we are the adults in the room now. And if we want a different trajectory for our children, we're going to have to do some of the learning ourselves so that we can have those conversations with them. So the way the book is set up is part one is sort of like, hey, we have a problem. Here's how we got here. And part two is a primer where it's essentially like, and if you need to brush up or you feel like there's a few starting points that you just don't quite remember, get started here and then go explore more with your children so you can learn together.
And so, as I said before, I have a very small child. And so with the book, is it, depending on the age of your child, kind of a different approach of how to be incorporating this, not just as you're homeschooling and this is, here, I'm just a bill and here's the School of Rock. But is it almost lifestyle tips of how, like, I take my kid voting with me? Is it things like that?
Yeah, so I think there's actually a lot of lifestyle components about this, because if you look at children's media and literature, Oftentimes, they will have someone who's sort of like a government character, and that's usually the mayor. But those people are not portrayed very positively. Sometimes, like at best, they're portrayed as like a bumbling doofus who like sort of gets it right, and we're all lucky in the end. And then at worst, like if you look at like the Simpsons mayor or other mayors in children's television, they'll be sort of out to do harm to the city that they're meant to protect. And so our kids from a very young age get a really anti-government or at least negative politician message from all sorts of inputs. And so on that lifestyle front, something that I encourage parents to do is when they see something that's positive that's happened in their neighborhood that is attributable to some government action, make sure you take note of it. And I'll give you an example from my morning. My daughter and I walked to go pick up bagels, and our road is getting repaved, and it has really needed it. And I was like, wow, I'm so glad that we're going to get fresh roads because it's been bumpy to drive here. That's a government decision. And so if you can point out those things like, hey, we have clean drinking water, great, there's a new park, or yeah, there's new paved roads, that's government action. That's one of those lifestyle switches that we can do in our families to kind of counteract all those negative messages that they're going to get from everywhere else.
I had never thought about the representation in youth children's media of how government officials are portrayed, but that's totally true as far as just the joke behind they're corrupt or XYZ thing as far as politicians go. That's really interesting to think about. And so one of the other points that you make in the book, I know, is the difference between being a citizen and being a partisan, or raising a citizen and raising a partisan. And I referenced it before. We're in very, very partisan times. And so what does that look like as responsible adulting and parenting when it comes to information versus how we in our family see the world?
Yeah, this is a great question. And the way that I like to think about it is the difference between raising an athlete or a spectator. And so if you wanted to raise a child who is really good at any sport, let's just pick soccer, you would say, okay, we're going to learn the rules. We're going to do some drills. We might have some scrimmages. We might work out off of the court, whatever. And you're trying to give them all the tools to be able to play that game really well. In that, you don't know what team they're going to be on. You don't know if they're going to play for a green team, a blue team, a red team, but you want them to be the best athlete they can, so you equip them with an understanding of the game and how to be a participant in it. If you were raising a spectator, you might say, like, here's who we cheer for, here's the chants, here's the colors we paint our faces, and it doesn't really matter the skill of the game, it's this is our team. That's raising a partisan. We want to be raising citizens, which is like raising an athlete. Raising a partisan is raising a spectator. And in politics, we're really not spectators. Even if someone sits out an election, that doesn't mean they're watching from the sidelines. That means there's a less capable version of a teammate. They might not know what team they're on, but someone's getting dragged down for it. And so I want parents to think about raising their children to be citizens so that they can be athletes in our democracy instead of spectators who either might cheer on someone not knowing why or be let down if their team loses, instead of thinking about how they can contribute to that game.
Very, very, as an athlete, as a former athlete, that is very great advice. I'm sure the book has plenty more from where that came from. It's called How to Raise a Citizen and Why It's Up to You to Do It. Her name is Dr. Lindsey Cormack. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you. This was really fun.
Absolutely.